leveraging CPEC for sustainable development in Pakistan, prospects, challenges, and policy options. I'm really happy to speak on this subject because it's a subject of great significance for Pakistan and for South Asia region, and also because there are so many misconceptions surrounding, this subject and this economic initiative. So the emphasis of my talk is on sort of clarifying some of those misconceptions, so it will be more descriptive and less heavy on theory. And I'm hoping that the theoretical and critical points can be raised during the Q&A. So here is the sequence of presentation. So CPEC, as some of you may know, is part of an ambitious multi-billion-dollar Chinese initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short. It is an initiative to establish a modern Silk Route connecting China with Central Asia, Europe, and Africa. It has a global scope with more than 68 countries in 3 continents, and it is a long-term commitment of People's Republic of China, because it is enshrined in the Communist Party of China's manifesto and official party doctrine. So it is not a one-off project, or a one-off initiative, and that's important to note. So here is the bare bones representation. It comprises 2 major components. The BRI, one is the overland Silk Route, and other is the maritime Silk Route, which is connecting various ports in the Indian Ocean. And this image shows you the various, so there are some terminology also, So the belt, right? BRI is the name, is the belt, and the belt has several corridors, and CPEC is one of those corridors, and in turn each corridor has several passages. So in this presentation, you can see that if you look at Gwadar in Pakistan, you can see that there is one corridor leading from China via Xinjiang to Gwadar, and that's CPEC. But there are also other corridors, that are sort of passing through various parts of the world. So that sort of gives you a scope of this this initiative. So I'll try to give you as much of a detailed overview as possible in this short time. So Pakistan-China, economic corridor comprises a number of fields of cooperation, and I have laid the major fields of cooperation here. So it includes cooperation in the energy sector, with power projects utilizing coal, wind energy, solar, LNG, and construction of transmission lines, infrastructure and transportation sector involving road and railroad infrastructure, aviation, and as well as data connectivity, Gwadar Port and other infrastructure projects supplementing the Gwadar Port. And then, we have cooperation in socio-economic and industrial development fields, and which envisage industrial development and industrialization through SEZs, or special economic zones. And I want you to look carefully at this map, because it shows the spatial, as in from space, spatial organization of the CPEC portfolio, development portfolio. And you can see that Pakistan has been divided under CPEC into 5 different zones of economic development, and which have different functions under economic functions or economic uses under CPEC. So you have an eastern corridor of industry and the eastern and central zone of industry and logistics. You have a southern Xinjiang zone, which is in green, of industry, logistic, and economic development. You have northern Pakistan logistics channel. Then if you look at Balochistan, you have the Western Pakistan, the mineral corridor and mineral and logistic corridor, which is indicated in blue color. And then in the south, near Gwadar, you have the southern Pakistan energy, logistics, and business development corridor. So the CPEC, various CPEC projects, they are not pick and choose, they are being sort of implemented under a specific spatial organization or spatial with an A strategy. Another thing that I want to sort of, I think and there are 3 passages connecting these. So you have a central corridor, running through Islamabad, via Dera Ghazi Khan in Pakistan. And you have an eastern corridor, if you can see that Lahore and Multan city there. So that's and Sakkar, in the south. So that's the eastern corridor connecting Karachi. And then you have a western corridor going through that blue area, So there are 3 passages, so CPEC is 1 corridor, but there are 3 passages, an eastern passage, a central passage, and a western passage. And so that was the spatial organization of or geographical organization CPEC, but it also has a temporal sequencing. So CPEC projects are also temporally structured in a chronological order. And you can see there is an early harvest phase which was supposed to have been completed by 2020, and that primarily involves energy sector and transport infrastructure and Gwadar projects. Then there are short-term projects which involve development of the western passage of CPEC, optic fiber connectivity and railway upgradation, and then there are medium-term projects involving industrialization, and then long-term projects extending to well into 2030. So this is how the CPEC projects are sequenced in different phases. Now, this is an important slide for understanding the overall rationale or logic of CPEC, which is that the idea is that the infrastructures projects, the public infrastructure such as Gwadar Port, the highways, the railroad projects, will be built first to provide a platform or base for the industrial development that is to take place in the second phase of CPEC, which is through the movement of private industry from China and elsewhere in the world to the special economic zones or SEZs in Pakistan, which would in turn lead to an industrial takeoff and export-led growth, and which finally would lead to, as envisaged in CPEC, to societal progress and sustainable development. So so it is important to keep in mind that this is the overall rationale or logic of CPEC. And this is the bureaucratic, and administrative organization. There is at the apex level, there is the Joint Cooperation Committee or JCC, which is co-chaired by the Planning Minister of Pakistan and the Vice Chairman of NDRC, National Development Reform Council in China. And under the JCC are various JWGs or joint working groups focused on the fields of cooperation that I have indicated in the previous slide. So this is, energy, Gwadar, transport, industrial projects and industrial development and SEZs, etc. So I want to take this opportunity to debunk some misconception, because especially on the Indian side, there has been a lot of negative propaganda about CPEC being somehow sort of China coming and, occupying this part of the continent, and then sort of, using it for, some, designs against India or other South Asian or other Indian Ocean countries. And those are, I want to emphasize that those are misplaced. CPEC is an economic cooperation venture. And there are also other misconceptions in Pakistan about CPEC as well among Pakistani audience and Pakistani public. So some of the main, things is that people often confuse CPEC with a road or route, So they are saying, oh, they have built the CPEC road here, but not there. And, and this is misplaced. CPEC is not a route or a road network. It is an economic development program, which includes roads. As I mentioned, the roads are necessary because if you have industrialization, how will you transport the goods and, other commodities, to and from countries? There is, of course, I mentioned at some of the strategic analysis and security analysis from both India and Pakistan saying CPEC is a strategic project. Well, it is not a strategic project in a military sense. It's not a security-driven project. It is a bilateral economic cooperation initiative which has a business logic. And then there is all sort of statements that somehow CPEC is a confidential or secret program. No, it is not. All CPEC projects and documents are publicly available at www.cpec.gov.pk. You can check the progress of CPEC projects. You can check the problems and issues those projects are facing. And even in terms of the approval of projects, all CPEC projects have to go through the normal planning channels, the normal planning machinery of Pakistan. Pakistani planning bureaucracy has to approve from the initiation to the final approval, each and every project, whether it costs 1 penny or it costs $1 billion. Also, in Pakistan, there is a misconception that CPEC is somehow a social development or charitable program. So I get all sorts of questions, having served as the focal person for CPEC in the planning department. And I get requests like, hey, there is we need a BHU or a basic health unit in our village. Can you include this project in CPEC? I have received questions like that, and then I have to tell them that no, this is not the rationale for CPEC. It is not a charitable or social service program. It is an economic development plan with an economic and business logic. So just sort of I wanted to lay it out at the start. So I'll go over now to the various important sectors of CPEC. So you have a good grounding in, which key sectors are being developed under CPEC in Pakistan. So CPEC energy energy comprises the biggest portfolio in CPEC. Very few people know this. They think that CPEC is all about railway lines and highways and motorways, but actually the bulk of CPEC investment is in energy sector, and this was on the demand of Pakistan, because when CPEC was initiated in 2015, Pakistan was undergoing a severe energy shortage and power shortage and crisis. Hussain Baksh would remember we had load sheddings running into more than 12 hours. Of course, we still have load shedding, but its extent is much smaller. And its reason is because the electricity is more costly, not because we don't have enough electricity. So there are 22 energy sector projects at a combined cost of $35 billion out of the total investment of $50 billion in CPEC. So that's the lion's share. It involves a mix of coal, hydel, and wind power generation. There are already 11 CPEC power projects have added 6,370 megawatts to our national grid. A 500 kV high voltage DC transmission line has been added, the Jamshoro-Matiari transmission line, which will lead to curtail distribution losses in our system. And eventually, the idea is that when all the CPEC projects have been completed, all the projects worth $35 billion, a total of 17,000 megawatts of electricity would be added to Pakistan's national grid. So the energy sector projects have helped reduce the crippling deficit in power generation in Pakistan. The emphasis in the next phase of energy sector projects is the improvement of the transmission system to prevent distribution losses, which are significant in Pakistani power grid. However, one of the issues is the high cost of power generation, especially because of the depreciation of the rupee, And so as a result, Pakistani side has requested our Chinese brothers to introduce some changes in the power generation mix of CPEC projects to reduce reliance on imported fuels such as LNG and coal, etc., and replace them with hydel sources, which use water energy of water and solar, the renewable energy sources. So here is you can see there are, of course, the bulk of CPEC power is coming from hydel, and these are run-of-the-river projects, which have very little environmental footprint. Of course, there is a small but substantial chunk of coal-based power projects, which is about 20% or less of the CPEC portfolio. But let's remember that even countries like China and India at the recent, COP27, they did not agree to, cutting down on coal, let alone Pakistan, which still has to, catch up with the industrialized world, So the coal-based power projects in CPEC, although there are concerns about environment and sustainability, but they have to be seen in the overall context of Pakistan's development status. Then the second most important sector is transportation and infrastructure. There are 4 major roads and railroad projects at a combined cost of $14 billion. In addition to that, there are 5 additional highway projects from local financing from Pakistan's own resources, and this is important to note that the Chinese investment or Chinese component of CPEC is only one component. There are matching projects, which are financed from Pakistan's public sector development program and from our own financial resources, which are as important as, the Chinese finance projects. So 888 kilometers of highways and motorways have been completed, and an additional 853 kilometers of high quality highways are under construction. In addition, urban mass transit such as Orange Line and Peshawar BRT have been completed. And this is sort of a map to show you, the highways that have been, completed and others which are under completion. So if you see this, from Multan to Sakhar here, on the eastern side of the map. So this is the CPEC Eastern Corridor, and this sector has already, this is an older map, that's why it shows the dotted lines, but actually this section is complete. And the Sakhar Hyderabad section has already been advertised. So work on it is expected to start very soon, Similarly, if you look at the western side at Quetta, so from Quetta northwards to Zob, work on this segment of the western passage of CPEC has already been started, the dualization of this road, and work on Quetta to Karachi road, especially the Quetta Khuzar section has already been advertised and is expected to start very soon. So, and Gwadar port in the north is already complete and connected with the rest of the country. Now I'll move to the industrial cooperation field. So a key component of building the energy sector projects and the highways, is to serve as a platform or base for industrial development. You need energy to run your industries, and you need roads and highways and motorways to, transport your goods. So 9 SEZs across Pakistan have been in all 4 provinces of Pakistan and Gilgit-Baltistan have been set up under CPEC. And developers of SEZs and potential investors have been granted liberal concessions, both in terms of taxations, as well as providing, utilities at the doorstep of these SEZs to attract FDI and spur industrial activity. However, development of only 5 SEZs has been completed, and the rest of the 4 SEZs are still to be developed fully, So the completed SEZs include Bostan SEZ in Balochistan, the Dhabeji, SEZ in Sindh, and the Quaid-e-Azam, industrial park in Punjab. And also in terms of the attracting of the FDI, significant local and international businesses are yet to populate, these SEZs, although smaller units have been set up, So this is a concern, that Pakistani policy makers have to keep in mind. And we expect that Chinese industries will be relocated to these SEZs in 2 to 5 years. So while, as I said, the CPEC main focus of CPEC was on industry and business. However, on the special request of Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan, President Xi of China inaugurated a special cooperation field of socio-economic development in SEZ, and a small portfolio of social development projects, especially centered around the town of Gwadar and Balochistan, has been included in CPEC. However, we should note that Chinese side is not willing to take up the responsibility for the social sector projects in Pakistan. They expect Pakistan to cater for its own, health, education, and other social services. So this is a representative list of the social sector projects under CPEC. You can see that, the Gwadar Expressway and as well as the Gwadar International Airport are being developed under grants and, zero rated credit. And then there are projects for, hospitals, necessary water supply, technical and vocational training, and even urban master planning. So now a little bit of theoretical sort of splash on, what has been a more technical and descriptive discussion. There are a number of theories that I have been sort of trying to understand, rely on to understand CPEC and anthropology and social geography of mega projects and infrastructure projects. And I'm just sort of headlining these here. We can discuss them in more detail in the question and answer. So, so for instance, if we are talking about infrastructure-led development such as CPEC, we saw, $23 billion worth of energy infrastructure and almost $15 worth of, transport infrastructure. And sort of one is saying, so what is it in these projects for the countries that are sort of supplying this infrastructure, countries like China, countries like US, and countries like Europe. And one of the great, social geographers and anthropologist, David Harvey, has pointed out that, the reason to, find these, globalization projects and large-scale infrastructure projects is that countries that accumulate trade surpluses, they need to find a geographical solution to invest the financial surplus that has been accumulated, as well as find destinations for exporting the excess industrial capacity, that cannot be profitably, employed at home. And they do this by using the power of infrastructure and telecommunication and internet as a means for space-time compression. And space-time compression is a word which means that geographical distances that, such as the Hindu Kush Himalayas, the mountain ranges, the distances can be compressed by building motorways and high-quality highways and airports that allow people and commodities to travel without friction, So kind of like, when we hit a patch of water, almost mountains and long distances are like patches of water. When we hit a patch of water on land, we need a bridge to cross it, So these highways and motorways are kind of like, these land bridges, which allow you to hop across vast distances, and, compress the distance to allow the free flow of commodities and reduce the costs of transportation, etc. Bent Fliberg at Oxford, who is a professor of management and economic geography, he has pointed out that the tendency to invest in infrastructure, and he says it is an overinvestment in infrastructure, is because of the optimism bias from a management point of view, which is a planning fallacy. That proponents or promoters of infrastructure projects think that the cost of infrastructure will be less, and its benefits and beneficiaries will be enormous. And as a result, they embark on these projects, but in the end, the costs of these projects tend to run into cost overruns. Their costs tend to become twice as much or thrice as much, and benefits are less. Now, when we look at the demand side of the infrastructure, so we have to ask, why is it that countries like Pakistan, like Burma, like Sri Lanka, like Ethiopia and Djibouti in Africa, why is it that they are demanding Chinese assistance, right, for these infrastructure and energy projects? And there are empirical arguments, and then there are theoretical arguments. The empirical argument is simple. Much of the infrastructure in South Asia and in the developing world was built at the heyday of the development discourse in the 1960s. So in Pakistan, this was a period of dictator General Ayub Khan, and many, if you talk to older people, they will nostalgically remember it as the decade of development. It is dubbed as the decade of development in Pakistan. And in India, this refers to the Nehruvian decade of development, in the 1950s and 60s, when planned cities and when, planned infrastructure was built. Many of our organizations, like the Planning Commission in Pakistan and India, and the WAPDA in Pakistan, and the power utilities in India, and the highway departments were actually set up in the 1960s, to undertake these projects. And now we are almost 50 years, half a century, from when these projects, and this is infrastructure, which was originally built in the 1960s and 70s, has started crumbling, So these countries, if they think that if they want to remain competitive, they have to invest in new modern infrastructure, in modernizing their railway lines. Similarly, our railway lines, whether they are in India or in Pakistan, were built in the late 19th century, in the 1890s, 1870s and 1880s and 1890s. So again, this railway infrastructure is crumbling, and you need finances and you need expertise, engineering expertise to rebuild this infrastructure. So that's the straightforward rationale. But it is also tied to another aspect which anthropologist Partha Chatterjee in his book Politics of the Governed has pointed out, that the historical rationale for the post-colonial state that came into being after the end of colonialism was to usher development and progress. This is how our leaders justify. So if you look at India, so the slogan of BJP is Vikas, which in Hindi means development. If you look at Pakistan, the slogan of Mian Nawaz Sharif and PMLN has been Tarakki and motorways and power projects. So in a way, the leadership, political leadership and I'm sure similarly in Bangladesh and other countries of South Asia. So in a way, our political leadership derives its legitimacy from undertaking development projects. It is the unfinished agenda or unfinished mission of the post-colonial developmental state. Another aspect from a management point of view and engineering point of view, which Bent Flivberg has pointed out, that large-scale infrastructure also has very sublime qualities, which attract both political leaders and managers and engineers and development practitioners. So it has an aesthetic sublime, which is, to build the largest bridge, the longest bridge, the tallest tower, and so on. So, for example, Pandit Nehru in the early decade of development called the hydroelectric dams the temples of modern India. These are the words of Pandit Nehru. That the dams are the temples of modern India. So there is an aesthetic. Engineers, they see it as a challenge. An engineer or architect who builds such a structure says, I built such a large structure, such a powerful structure. And political leaderships, they see them as their legacy. So Mian Nawaz Sharif, whenever he, when he was in exile for last 10 years, say, I was the one who gave Pakistan motorways. I was the one who ended load shedding, So for the politician, beyond getting votes, it also is their legacy, So these three sublime qualities of infrastructure lend themselves to be championed by, managers, political leaders, and all sort of stakeholders. Now, the effects and consequences. So, as I mentioned, Bent Flipberg has pointed out, one of the consequences of infrastructure is that they always are over time, that their proponents say they will be constructed in 5 years, but they take 10 years. If they say it will be built in 8 years, it takes 15 years to actually build, and they run into cost overruns, the cost of dollar and rupee changes. Anthropologists and social activists have pointed out that these infrastructure projects, they tend to be so huge that they cause disruption in the rhythms of everyday life of people, and they displace people. So Amita Bhaviskar, in her landmark book, In the Valley of the River, about the Narmada Valley Development Project in India, has pointed out how the Adivasi people of, on the banks of a Narmada River, were uprooted as a result of the 300 plus large and small dams that were built on the Narmada River. In Pakistan, we have seen that the people who were displaced by the Mangla Dam that was built in the 1960s are still living as, a diaspora in the UK. Very few people know that a large chunk of the British Pakistani diaspora actually went there because they were displaced by the Mangla Dam, especially the Kashmiri and, Upper Punjab folks. So this in turn leads to the rise of social movements by the local people to counter the negative, to speak out against the negative effects of these projects. So with that theoretical prelude in mind, I will talk about the challenges of CPEC projects. So one of the first challenges in the context of Pakistan is the misleading rhetoric or discursive framing of CPEC, as I pointed out earlier. Somehow our political parties, various political parties, not just one, all of them have used such flowery and exaggerated language about CPEC that, they use words like game changer, they use words like, transformative, and etc., which has led to the generation of very high expectations, so that our people have come to, believe that CPEC is the solution for all their problems, for all Pakistan's problems. The second issue, as I pointed out in the theoretical prelude, is that infrastructure mega projects cause disruption of local livelihoods, rhythms of life, and there is a place-based movements or social movement politics that crystallizes in opposition to such projects. Then, because these projects cost billions of dollars, so there is issues of debt and financial stability for the countries, because even if the borrowing is in the form of soft loans, over the long run, it adds to the debt portfolio of a developing country like Pakistan. And then, because economic development is inherently, it generates economic inequality. So building of large projects in one part of the country almost always creates resentment among, the federating units in another part of the country. And there are regional level rivalries and jealousies and competition, such as between India and Pakistan, or between China and India, which leads to a certain kind of security discourse around these and security challenges around these projects. So let's go one by one. And Hussain Bhai Sahab, please remind me when I'm running out of time. So Pakistani political parties and media personalities have projected CPEC as a panacea for all the social and economic problems of Pakistan. So that now the person from my village or from another village of Balochistan says, you know, I don't have a basic health unit in my village. Can you please include it in CPEC? You know, so these kinds of exaggerated expectation. So this has led to the creation of unrealistic expectations of an economic turnaround from Pakistan, whereas our problems are long-term in nature and there is no easy solution for our problems. Ordinary public and even bureaucrats have a misplaced notion that CPEC projects will improve essential social services, you know, health and education and other things, and that we will not have to do all the hard work that we have to do, you know, to provide those services to our people. In terms of ecological issues and politics of place, especially in Balochistan, economic growth using a market logic is inherently unequal, and as David Harvey has so eloquently pointed out, that it generates uneven geographical development. It creates development in one part of the country or region and underdevelopment in another part of the country or region. And infrastructure mega projects and to disrupt local people's livelihoods. So fears of disruption and displacement have led people in Gwadar, especially the fisher folk, the fishermen of Gwadar, to protest against some of these projects and stage dharnas and roadblocks. Civil society in Pakistan has raised concerns about the environmental fallout, especially for marine species, you know, on which our, you know, fishermen depend for their livelihood. So, for instance, the fishermen of Gwadar have registered their objections to the 300 megawatt coal power project, you know, with the EPA. Similarly, the High Court of Balochistan has raised reservations in some of its decisions regarding, you know, the coal-fired power projects, such as the Hub Power project or the forthcoming project in Gwadar. This is an image from a local social movement in Gwadar, which is called Gwadar Haq Do or Gwadar Rights Movement. And you can see the children holding placards, you know, protesting against, you know, illegal trawling in Gwadar and, you know, various, you know, issues arising out of some of the mega projects. Now, the government of Pakistan and the provincial government have tried to address these concerns by stipulating and notifying the share of local people in employment in CPEC projects. So under the federal legislation, all 100% employment up to grade 15, BPS, basic pay scale 15, has to be for local people, and above that 40% share has to be for local people. The Gwadar master plan, which was originally developed, had local people had protested against it. So this master plan has been modified in 2019 to minimize the displacement of local people because of the infrastructure around the port, such as the Gwadar Expressway. The government of Pakistan has initiated a 300 billion urban renewal project to improve the civic and municipal infrastructure in the old town of Gwadar, where fishermen live. And increasing safeguards have been put in place to minimize environmental footprint and mitigate the environmental impacts of CPEC projects. Now, debt and financial sustainability is another issue. Pakistan's economy, for a long time, since the 1970s, has been plagued by a debt burden. Now, while CPEC projects are not an immediate threat, as some people from outside Pakistan have been saying, there is no immediate threat to Pakistan's economy from CPEC projects, but they will add as the payments of these projects mature, you know, over next 10 to 15 years or 10 to 20 years, the long-term debt servicing liability or the debt payments will increase, you know. But I want to emphasize this, and you know, this is and again to remove, this is one of the misconceptions that has been propagated. There are no immediate financial risks to Pakistan from CPEC projects. The immediate debt servicing liabilities that Pakistan is facing now are arising from loans that Pakistan took 30 years ago, you know. So their payments and their debt servicing liabilities are ones that are threatening Pakistan. The debt servicing liabilities of the loans under CPEC or the soft loans that are being taken will mature after 20 years. So we have to start thinking about it now to prevent, that problem in 20 years' time. Chinese credit is mostly in the form of soft loans and grants. Of course, there are loans. Grants are a small portion of it, but other are soft loans. So there is no immediate danger to Pakistan's economy or financial risk. And I want to repeat this: Pakistan does not have a Chinese debt problem, as has been pointed by certain Western commentators. So this is it. You can see this paragraph that China is becoming one of the largest creditors to Pakistan, but this is also true of many developing countries other than Pakistan, because in fact, Western countries don't have because their economic growth has been slowed down, they don't have enough credit to lend. And because China has a huge surplus, it has more credit to lend to all the developing countries, whether they are in Asia, South Asia, East Asia, or in Africa and Middle East. In fact, in Europe, so China has been lending to European countries for infrastructure projects, by the way. Now, so that is the overall debt. But if you look at the debt servicing obligation, so you can see that CPEC loans, they are these ones here where you see China, China and others. So they are together, they are less than, $1 billion, the payments that, we have to make to China annually, which is less than 20% of Pakistan's, less than 15% of rather Pakistan's overall, debt servicing liability, So this $8.6 billion is the total debt servicing liability. And you can see that majority of these debt servicing obligation is coming from private and IMF debt. If you look at this orange color box, see, 5,000 million or $5 billion out of the $8.5 billion is coming from private debt and IMF loans, not from Chinese loans. So it is important to make that distinction. Then the third issue is balancing growth and equity. And here I'm coming to Sashi's point. While Pakistani political parties claim that CPEC is above politics, the reality is otherwise. There is broad acceptance of CPEC in Pakistan, but there are concerns about its distribution and impacts across provinces, especially for marginalized provinces like Pakistan, because the two major political parties in Pakistan their constituencies are along the Indus River, in the Indus River basin, and Balochistan and southern regions of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa fall outside that region, So majority of CPEC projects are also located in those two provinces. So there has been rightly placed outrage by political parties in Balochistan, against the distribution of these projects. Also, civil society in Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan have raised concerns about exclusion of their regions from CPEC projects. Now, so the objections raised by civil society and political parties in Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan has been that there has been lack of meaningful consultancy and transparency. So if you are building a port, if you are building a project or road through Gilgit-Baltistan, then the local political leadership and local civil society and stakeholders must be consulted before you start that project. Exclusion of Balochistan province from some major infrastructure projects. This was raised, because the eastern alignment of passage of CPEC was constructed first, and the construction on Western Passage was not started in 2015. So this was another objection. And there was concern that the rights of the local people may not be protected in building Gwadar Port and other allied projects. So the government of Pakistan, federal government, has responded. So this is the portfolio of CPEC, of Balochistan and CPEC at the in rupees at the 2018 rates, exchange rate. So it's 255 billion rupees in total. So if we convert it in current dollar rate, it comes to around $2.5 billion. So people of Balochistan felt, and political parties felt, that if overall CPEC investment is $50 billion, so reserving $2.5 billion only, which is 10 to 15% of CPEC, is not fair to the people of Balochistan. Now, the government has tried to address these concerns by starting work on the dualization of CPEC Western Passage, which is the Zob, Kuchlak, Zob, and DI Khan and Islamabad. So the work on this project has started at a cost of 81 billion rupees. Similarly, the next section of the CPEC Western Passage, which is the DI Khan Zob section, has been placed on the top priority list in the negotiation with Chinese side for the building of the next round of highways, under CPEC. Projects like rehabilitation of Gwadar Old Town, improving its municipal and civic infrastructure have been included. Similarly, government has undertaken targeted projects for fishermen's welfare, in Balochistan, including special scholarships for students from Gwadar, but also specifically for fishermen's kids, extension of cheap credit, for starting their businesses, and a provision of subsidized boat engines and solar power units for the fishermen and ordinary people of Gwadar. So these are some of the others. Now, there are also security challenges because BRI and CPEC, while they are economic projects, they are tied to China and Pakistan's global and regional economic and security objectives. And so there are rival powers at both the global level, which is US, and at the regional level, which is primarily India, who perceive the growth of Chinese influence, even if it comes through economic investments, as a threat to their influence in the region. So they have been voicing their objection to CPEC and BRI very loudly. The US sees the expansion of Chinese influence as a threat, and India wants to remain and I'm not talking about the people of India, I'm talking about the Indian military and foreign policy establishment. India wants to remain a regional hegemon in South Asia and the Western Indian Ocean. So some points by way of conclusion and way forward, we can take up more in the Q&A session. Pakistani policy makers cannot rely on trickle-down effect for the benefits of CPEC to reach the local people. You saw the diagram where it says that first there will be investment in infrastructure, then the industry will come, and then the social benefits will materialize after 30 years. People, especially in marginalized regions, provinces like Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan, cannot wait for 30 years for the benefits of those projects to reach them. So Pakistani policymakers and bureaucrats like me have to ensure that we put in place specific policies in terms of their employment, in terms of scholarships, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of agricultural and farm credit, ensuring sustainable fisheries to address their concerns. There also has to be transparency and forthright, frank acknowledgement of the environmental costs, of these projects, because these projects will have an environmental footprint. And we can argue that these environmental costs are a necessary evil, but unless we acknowledge them, how can we take steps to mitigate them? So the policymakers and planners must acknowledge them rather than brushing these concerns under the carpet. Pakistani economic and financial managers have to take a hard look at CPEC portfolio and move carefully on signing on additional projects. Problem with the first phase of CPEC, the early RS phase, is that Pakistani political leadership was doing pick and choose in a sweet shop. They were signing on to projects, and because Chinese side was willing, as a long-term friend of Pakistan, so they were trying to attract projects to their respective constituencies, and there were a lot of projects. And now we see that while those power sector projects, they reduced our power deficit, our electricity deficit, but the cost of our power sector debt, which is called circular debt in Pakistan, has ballooned to unmanageable proportions. And the cost of electricity generation has consequently also risen. So our planners have to, take a hard look, what kind of projects they want to sign on to and what would be their financial consequences. And there is need for more transparency and open-ended dialogue with academics, with social activists, with environmental activists, around the effects of CPEC projects. And last but not least, we have to ensure and put in place safeguards for inclusiveness to ensure fairness and equity for all the classes, working classes, middle classes, and the elite, as well as equity across the geographical regions of Pakistan. We cannot, pretend that, and tell people this, we are doing these projects for your benefit. They have to feel the benefits of these projects.